Chapter 651, Meeting Again. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Upon seeing Wuxia warning, Klein's first found himself blessed with good luck. Thankfully I didn't court death and continue the exploration. He didn't hesitate to heave a sigh of relief. Although he had seen the mural related to Ouroboros, as well as the terrifying monster, Anderson, who mutated for some unknown reason, he didn't actually physically get himself into a dangerous situation. I wonder if I'll randomly appear in a region in the next dream, or will it continue from before? If it's the latter, the best choice of action is to not disturb Anderson so as to avoid agitating him. I'll just walk the same way back and leave that black cloister. Klein retracted his gaze and continued reading. Apart from the dream, the other things aren't that troublesome. As long as you don't attempt to approach those ruins, directly look at the thing that flies in the sky at midday, or challenge the storms that give ample warning, then it wouldn't be a problem if you follow the safe sea routes that have been verified by others. As for mermaids, just keep cruising forward and you'll ultimately encounter them. This is because, at their levels, they will only live in relatively safer areas, and there aren't many such areas. Finally, I hope everything goes smoothly. Sincerely, your friend who might be often in deep sleep due to reaching a critical stage in his maturing development, Wuxia. The final sentence was long and somewhat awkward sounding, but Klein instantly understood what the snake of fate meant. Before I'm born, don't disturb me unless it's something extremely important and critical. I'll try my best. Klein replied inwardly without any assurance. If he successfully advanced, then it might not take long before he had to seek Wuxia's help in finding the sequence 4 potion formula for the seer pathway. Being more confident with finding mermaids, Klein immediately left the dream, wore his hat, and headed for the pirates' dining hall. Due to the dream's disturbance, most of the food had turned cold, but the pirates still had a great time eating. After all, no one died. Since no one died during this mystical encounter, they naturally felt great that they had something to brag about. Do you want a cup of milk? Frank Lee held a plate and sat opposite Klein, asking warmly. Recalling the conversation in the dream, Klein firmly shook his head with a deadpan expression. Inwardly, he was very worried that the milk on the ship were all Frank's experimental products. Frank didn't mind as he gulped a mouthful of milk. I remember telling you about those little things in the dream. Yes. Klein cut through a dragon bone fish that was cooked in sauce, and he stuffed it into his mouth. This kind of fish was well known for having few bones. Most of the time, it only had one main bone. In Backland, due to its various species, they were considered a mid to high-end delicacy, but east of the Oravi Island, in the periphery of the safe sea routes, they could often be caught. Frank chuckled. My description back then was a little inaccurate. Their true purpose was to successfully produce milk even when they aren't in a state capable of lactation, regardless of whether they are male or female. As long as they consume it, they will produce milk and return to normal once they aren't fed. This way, the milk cows don't have to suffer any torture. This way, it becomes fairer for men and women to bring up their children. It will be beneficial for women to head out for work. Wait, why are you telling me this? Klein nearly failed to maintain his persona as Gairman Sparrow. At that instant, he felt that the nickname of Crazy shouldn't be Gairman Sparrow's but Frank Lee's. He's actually someone who supports equality between men and women. However, his means are a little terrifying. That's right. The Church of Mother Earth is like the Church of the Goddess. They believe that women should have the same standing in society as men. However, they place more emphasis on reproduction, treating it as the holiest matter. Among the 7 churches, the Church of Storms and the Church of the God of Combat are most biased towards men. The Church of the Sun is next. As for the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, they are different from the other churches. They discriminate based on intelligence. The Church of Steam is neutral and has even worked with the Church of the Goddess to encourage women to head out for work due to the need for more labor in the development of industry. Klein instantly had the differences between the 7 churches flash past his mind. He looked up and glanced at Frank Lee as though what he had just said was something trivial. This made Frank rather happy as he couldn't help but drink a few more mouthfuls of milk. After the pirates finished their lunch in batches, Katlia pushed open the windows to the captain's cabin once again. Using magic, she amplified her voice. "There's an island 5 nautical miles ahead of us. We will dock there and wait for the storm to pass. In these waters, every time there's a switch from noon to nighttime, there's a possibility of a terrifying storm occurring. I cannot confirm when it will happen, but I believe it's safer for us to wait for it to pass before we continue our voyage." She went into the details a lot more than in the past, as it wasn't a sudden occurrence, and there was plenty of time. One of the things people at sea feared the most was a storm, therefore, no one objected to it. They went according to Katlia's instructions. Under Navigator Odolov's and Bosun Nina's guidance, they nervously prepared to dock. And this made Klein confirm one of the matters that Will Septon had mentioned. Do not challenge any signs of a storm. Before long, an island covered with gigantic trees appeared ahead of the future. The more than 100-meter-long sailboat adjusted its course and docked against the wind. More than half an hour passed as the sky suddenly dimmed. Lead-colored clouds surfaced one after another. They overlapped with one another as though they enveloped all the surrounding waters. Amidst a loud boom and blinding flashes of lightning, a hurricane from afar swept over. It was connected to the clouds at the top and to the sea at the bottom. It was more exaggerated than any legendary giant. It was like a gigantic coiling serpent in a bid to destroy the world. The terrifying hurricane brought with it waves that towered like mountains. Lightning that branched out like trees and didn't stop because of the incoming storm. It constantly struck the surface of the sea, splitting into tiny electric bolts that spread outwards. As the rain pattered down on the Future's deck, it made the pirates who had entered the cabin or gotten shelter feel like the apocalypse had arrived. Such a storm didn't last too long. The sea calmed down after about 15 minutes, and the hurricane dissipated. The midday sunlight reigned in the sky once again. You can head on to the island for a while, but don't wander inside. You have to be within the range of the cannons. Katlia gave the pirates a brief chance of reprieve. Klein kept in mind Will Septon's warnings and had no desire to explore the island. After leaving the future, he only walked about on the shore, taking in the feeling of having his feet on solid ground. Beach, sunlight, trees. It feels like a vacation, Klein thought in amusement when he suddenly noticed a rapidly moving black dot through the corner of his eye. It was rushing over from the boundary of a cliff. The black dot increased in size to reveal a human figure. Not far away, Katlia, who was on the sand, also noticed the abnormality. She half turned around and took off the heavy glasses on her nose bridge. The figure with emerald-colored eyes approached. He was wearing a white shirt, a black vest, and trousers. He was of medium build with his blonde hair split 70-30. Anderson. The unlucky Anderson. Klein instantly recognized him. The person was none other than the terrifying Anderson in the dream world. It was the Anderson who said that his companions never returned after they proceeded to explore the hall but had claimed to be a member of the exploration team. At that moment, Anderson raised his right hand. Without any hesitation, as Gehrman Sparrow, Klein took out a charm and chanted a single word in ancient Hermes. Storm. The charm made of tin immediately turned sharp, resembling a thin blade. With the infusion of spirituality, the wind in midair reverberated. With a deadpan expression, Klein threw out the charm in his hand at Anderson. So. Azure sharp blades shot at their target like a lined-up firing squad. Anderson was raising his right hand high with a smile and was about to say something when he heard a deep and mysterious incantation and the scalp-numbing sound of the wind. His gaze froze as he threw himself to the side and somersaulted multiple times in a pathetic manner as if the area before him was scorching metal. So. The wind blades struck the beach, slicing clear slits into the sand, but they were just short of hitting their target. Stop! Stop! As Anderson nimbly somersaulted to dodge, he shouted, "I come in peace. I mean no harm." Anderson Hood, Admiral of Stars, suddenly said a name as she raised her hand to stop Gehrman Sparrow, who had taken out a charm. "She knows Anderson." Klein didn't rashly chant the charm's incantation as he said in a deep voice, "He has already mutated. I saw him in the dream." He wasn't surprised at meeting the unlucky Anderson. This was because the pirates were all in the same area during the dream. They were all very close to one another, which also meant that Anderson, who wasn't too far away, was also very close to the future. No. Not at all. Anderson stood up, at a loss on whether to laugh or cry. He raised his hands like he was surrendering. "I recognize you. You asked me many questions. Back then, I wanted to pull a prank on you. Really, it was just a joke to enliven the mood. Don't you think that having the mood suddenly change into one of horror is an exhilarating experience? Of course, I'm referring to the target and not myself. If I had participated in the exploration, how could I still be alive? That is what I'm worried about." Klein didn't believe his explanation. Anderson shrugged and said, "I was preparing to explain at the moment I said that. I was planning on telling you that I was joking and had planned to seek your help. I hoped that you could take me away, but at that moment, the dream ended. Damn it, I was really too unlucky." "It does comply with the traits of being unlucky," Klein silently muttered. He planned on flipping a coin right there and then to test him with divination when he suddenly heard Admiral of Stars Catlia say, "Listen to what he has to say. He's very famous in the Fog Sea. He has the nickname, Strongest Hunter." Chapter 652, Mermaid Clues Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios Strongest Hunter. Klein was shocked by this nickname. After carefully recalling, he realized that the man didn't have a bounty on his head. That meant that Anderson Hood's description of himself in the dream world was real and reliable. He was more of a treasure hunter. Unfortunately, Gehrman Sparrow hasn't killed any pirate admirals, otherwise, would be the strongest hunter. Klein didn't let down his guard as he coldly looked at the man. As long as Anderson Hood showed any signs of abnormality, he would immediately throw the charm in his hand. After all, the activation incantation was all the same. At his sequence, he could do it simultaneously while injecting his spirituality. Upon hearing the Admiral of Stars' introduction, Anderson seriously shook his head. "No, I'm not the strongest hunter." "Oh, he's still rather humble." Klein sighed inwardly. Anderson chuckled and added, "Admiral of Stars, if you really insist, then it's best if you add the condition, below that of a demigod." "Yes, the strongest hunter below that of a demigod. I take back what I just said." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched indiscernibly. Seeing no response from the Admiral of Stars, Anderson naturally lowered his arms. "These waters are very dangerous, but it contains many treasures. In this regard, I believe the two of you are very aware. In the past, many adventurers, or more precisely, treasure hunters, have entered these waters to seek our fortuitous encounters, but most of them didn't leave these waters alive. Heh, I'm talking about most, so there are always some lucky ones who can obtain items and ingredients while successfully leaving. The treasure hunting team I was in was organized by two treasure hunters who are experienced in this area. They claim to be very aware of which ruins are not to be explored in the first half of the safe route and which ruins could be attempted. They also claim to know which methods should be used to hunt various kinds of monsters, as well as what methods should be used to avoid evil creatures who have lost control. I've always been curious about these waters and was successfully convinced by them and joined the expedition." "And then?" Cadlia looked at the figure opposite her with her black eyes that had a purple hue. Anderson sighed and said, "It was very smooth in the beginning, as smooth as it can be. We avoided danger and obtained many of the relics left behind by former explorers, and we also hunted some monsters and obtained several ingredients. Everything changed when we discovered a strange temple on a submerged island. There were many murals which remained intact. This gentleman has also seen it in the dream world. He used his chin to gesture at Klein. That's not important, Klein replied calmly. Anderson shook his head and smiled bitterly. One of the murals was very sinister. It described a pilgrimage proceeding forward amidst a parted sea. The leader of the pilgrimage is depicted as an angel, having long silver hair that reached his back. He had very mild facial features. I was the first to arrive in front of that mural. I reached out my right hand and habitually outlined the various lines in midair. It's true, I really didn't touch it. I was at least 5 centimeters away, but to my surprise, the angel in the mural suddenly opened his eyes. Your nickname as the strongest hunter must have been forced as a result of you attracting too many problems. Klein scoffed silently without any sense of pity. Silver-haired angel? Katlia asked in return. Yes, but I'm not sure which angel it is. At the very least, he hasn't appeared in any of the portraits of the 7 churches. Of course, the mural artist might have casually added it, and it might not be real. Anderson was just about to raise his hand to comb his hair when he discovered that the man wearing a round-neck shirt, a brown jacket, pantaloons with a dark-colored cap was coldly staring at him. It appeared as though any abnormal action would result in the man attacking without hesitation. But at that moment, Klein was thinking about something else. This fellow is very professional when it comes to art. At the very least, the typical person wouldn't be able to know of so many religious portraits. Katlia, who didn't receive an adequate answer, immediately turned her head towards Klein, her gaze filled with an inquisitive look. She had just heard from Anderson Hood that Gehrman Sparrow had seen the mural. Perhaps, this member of the organization that has been gifted by the Lord can recognize the angel. Katlia had an inexplicable feeling that Gehrman Sparrow might really know the answer. Considering how Mam Hermit would be able to obtain the answer at the next tarot club from a casual question, Klein didn't hesitate to simply say, Tail Devourer Ouroboros. Tail Devourer Ouroboros? That angel of fate? That king of angels? Katlia unknowingly pursed her lips as the purple hue in her eyes turned slightly more obvious. The last time she had heard this name was from the tarot club, thanks to Miss Justice. And that was her first time learning of the existence of the kings of angels. She never expected to obtain clues of them in the real world in just a few months. Tail Devourer Ouroboros? Anderson ruminated over the name in a daze. Klein didn't speak further, showing his disinterest in explaining. Seeing how the Admiral of Stars wasn't speaking a word, Anderson could only laugh and continue, I thought I was hallucinating back then because the mural didn't show any abnormality after that. Following that, our team fractured into 2. Most of them were frightened by my account and believed that they shouldn't continue exploring the temple. The remaining third desired to obtain more treasure and began setting off deeper into the temple. We waited an entire day, noon switched night a total of 3 times, but we didn't manage to see them return. We were all outstanding treasure hunters, so we knew that something must have gone wrong. After making some confirmations, we didn't dare stay any longer or wait. We immediately left the temple and got onto the ship to return the way we came. We had already received plenty, and we didn't wish to take any more risks. Wait, none of you had the intention to save your companions? Yes, a treasure hunting team that is temporarily put together will only bother with themselves and the few friends they are familiar with when they encounter danger. According to my experience, those companions of yours that vanished might be eating the fingers of corpses. Klein lampooned and didn't reprimand Anderson. Anderson sighed again and said, after leaving that temple, I discovered that there was something abnormal about myself. On the one hand, I became very unlucky, with everything I do failing. Even when drinking light beer in silence, I'll realize that someone had used a beer barrel as a toilet and pissed in it. Well, that's not what I encountered. It was my companion. On the other hand, we obtained control of ourselves in our dreams. We were no longer in a reverie and knew something, but we had no means to take action. Therefore, a number of my companions, a third of the original number of people, ventured deep into the dream world. They never returned. Katlia, who had been listening in silence, asked, "What about their bodies in the real world?" "They mutated into monsters, killing quite a number of my remaining companions and sailors." Anderson took an obvious deep breath. "We might have successfully killed those monsters, but due to the lack of sailors, as well as encountering a streak of bad luck, we failed to reach this island in time before the storm arrived. Therefore, our ship sank. Likewise for our loot. The rest of my companions either drowned, got struck by lightning, or got eaten by the underwater monsters. I didn't see all of it myself. As for me, I was relatively stronger and luckier than them. I was sent flying by the waves and successfully swam to the shore of this island and began attempting to create a canoe to leave this area. As you can see, even my final axe has shattered. It was also reflected in the dream." Anderson's final sentences were directed at Klein. "They really are a treasure-hunting group plagued with bad luck." Klein inwardly drew the crimson moon for him. He believed that Anderson's description was likely real. His experience didn't seem to be fabricated out of thin air. However, it was unknown if he was hiding something. Perhaps, Anderson had really gone deep into the temple and eaten the fingers of the corpses before coming out, believing that he was fine. Perhaps, he had already explored numerous places in the dream world and had been corrupted by some unknown creature in an inconspicuous manner. After Anderson had finished recounting his experience, he smiled at Katlia and the man who he didn't know the name of. "Do I have the honor of being a passenger on your future? I will pay for the fare." He looked as if payment wasn't a problem at all. Katlia once again turned her head to the side towards Klein, as though asking if he would accept. "This is to say that you are leaning towards accepting his request. Aren't you going to do any tests? I have to go above the gray fog to divine before I can provide a clear answer." "What gives you the confidence?" "A beyonder power obtained once a mystery prior reaches sequence 5. Klein figured out a lot of information from Katlia's gaze. Just as he was hesitating, Anderson hurriedly said, "I'm very familiar with the route ahead. I can help you avoid the latent dangers on the safe sea route, and I can tell you which ruins aren't to be explored. I can also give you early notice to avoid the singing voices of the mermaids in time." Singing voices of mermaids? Klein's eyes nearly lit up as it took him a great deal of effort to maintain Gehrman Sparrow's image. "Yes, a day's voyage from here, and I mean a day in terms of the world outside, we will circle around a ruin and turn." Upon saying that, Anderson suddenly realized something as he shut his mouth with a smile without saying anything more. Klein thought for a moment and took out a gold coin in front of Anderson as he silently chanted. "Anderson-hood is problematic." He repeated 7 times and went through the standard process of divination, but he didn't hold any hopes for an answer. It was a test on Anderson. If Anderson really was problematic, he would definitely show signs of guilt. After all, he couldn't be certain of Gehrman Sparrow's divination standard and was unable to determine if he could disrupt it successfully. Ding! The gold coin was flung into the air before landing. Klein glanced at it before putting it into his pocket. "No problem. I'll later make a confirmation by going above the gray fog." Klein added inwardly. Katlia looked at Anderson and nodded. "I agree to your request. However, after we leave these waters, you need to hand over half of what you have. If there's nothing, I'll not take anything either." Anderson fell silent for a few seconds before smiling again. "Deal." Having found a way out, he clearly relaxed as he smiled. "Also, I have to warn you that although my bad luck is limited to me alone, you should be careful because I might attract monsters. Of course, I believe that with you, this gentleman, and myself, we should be able to guarantee our safety." Just as he said that, the entire island quaked. A smoky plume emanated out of the primitive forest. Don't tell me a monster is really coming, Anderson subconsciously turned agape. The ground trembled slightly as a figure that was nearly 3 meters tall appeared at the boundary of the island's primitive forest. Its body was grayish-white in color, seemingly formed from boulders. Its face was potholed without any obvious eyes, nose, mouth, or ears. Stone giant. Cadlia muttered the monster's type. Be it Klein or Anderson, both of them knew nothing about such monsters. However, they didn't cast an inquisitive look at Cadlia. They focused on the monster, looking highly professional. Cadlia turned her body to face the docked future. She raised her right hand halfway and amplified her voice. Aim. The pirates on duty immediately adjusted dozens of cannons on the port of the ship, aiming them right at the stone giant which was lumbering over. Boom! 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 Cannonballs flew out and landed around the stone giant, sending dust flying as the bombardment covered a huge area. The ground clearly quaked as flames surged. Splinters spewed everywhere as though everything could be destroyed. Tap! 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 The tall grayish-white figure tore out of the dust, having not suffered any serious damage. All it had were a few cracks on its surface. Cadlia said without a perturbed expression, this isn't a kind of giant, but a kind of stone golem. Its core is the main ingredient of Sequence 5 Guardian from the Guardian Sequence pathway. Therefore, its defenses are extremely high. Amidst the reverberating cannon bombardment, Klein nearly suspected if there was a problem with his auditory senses. Since you know that the stone giant has high defense, why did you use a cannon bombardment? Isn't that a waste of cannonballs? He thought in puzzlement as he lampooned. Perhaps hearing his inner thoughts, Cadlia said as she watched the stone giant approach, I've never encountered such a beyonder creature before, so I wish to do some tests. I have nothing to say against such a reason. Klein was rendered speechless. At this moment, Anderson Hood, who had been observing the stone giant the entire time, raised his hand and said, Do you have anyone who has beyonder powers in the ice and frost domain? Me, Cadlia coldly answered. Seeing how Ma'am Hermit had the means, Klein swallowed back the words he nearly said out loud. He really didn't wish to activate creeping hunger unless necessary, despite Zombie possessing the powers of ice and frost. He believed that he couldn't find any suitable food on the island. Cadlia took out a grayish-black scroll from a secret pocket in her warlock robe and softly chanted a single word in ancient Hermes, freezing. Silently, the scroll was consumed by icy blue flames and immediately, there were crystalline streams of light that appeared in midair. They flew towards the stone giant and froze the target within as icicles hung from it. Amidst jarring, cracking sounds, the ice layer cracked in turn as the stone giant slowly walked out of the zone. However, its grayish-white exterior had turned a darker shade. Its motions were a lot stiffer than before. At this moment, Anderson raised his hands as though he was a conductor gesturing for the audience to give their applause. Orange-yellow flames which were almost white in color sprouted at the stone giant's feet as though it had stepped into a particular trap. Its surface rapidly produced a bout of steam as cracks spread across its body in the form of deep fractures. Anderson pulled back with his right arm as a burning white spear condensed in his palm. The flames at the tip of the spear condensed to a point as it emitted a blinding luster. The spear flew out, accurately hitting the crack in the stone giant's belly as the flames melted a huge hole in it. As for Anderson Hood, who was originally on the beach, he seemed to merge with the burning white spear. The flames brightened as he strangely appeared behind the stone giant. He held his left hand into a fist as his arm bulged. With an uppercut, he struck upwards from the hole and into the stone giant's heart. This simple-looking strike created an exaggerated effect. The stone giant immediately froze on the spot as cracking sounds constantly emitted from its interior. In seconds, it had crumbled into rubble. A critical strike. Klein's pupils constricted. Katlia calmly stood on the spot and said without any surprise, Sequence 5 of the Hunter pathway is Reaper. Furthermore, they are good at finding the weakness of their prey. Reaper. A Death Reaper of life? No wonder. Klein nodded slightly. At this moment, Anderson crouched down and rummaged through the stone giant's carcass. Then, he turned his head and smiled ruefully. It's not a real monster. That meant that there weren't any spoils of war. While Anderson described the situation, the rubble vanished at a discernible pace. For an unlucky fellow like you, don't be the one opening chests or looting corpses. Klein couldn't help but lampoon inwardly. Anderson returned and kept droning on. The greatest problem of these waters is this. Not every monster will provide you with riches. This is because conjured monsters such as this are a part of more powerful monsters of a higher level. Of course, it's possible that they're the result of remnant powers and auras. Klein already had a preliminary theory towards this. Having gone through the voyage, he discovered that there were beyonder traces of sun, evernight, storm, and the spectator pathway. He had a more fleshed-out theory from his previous theories. He originally suspected that these waters were the remnants of a battlefield in a war between Second Epoch ancient gods. Storm belonged to Elf King Sanayathrim, Spectator belonged to Dragon King Ankwelt, Evernight belonged to King of Demonic Wolves Flegria. With Little Sun providing him with the legendary records from the City of Silver at each gathering, Klein had gained a preliminary understanding of the authorities of the 8 ancient gods in the Second Epoch. However, the constant midday and the sun chariot formed from gold had made Klein have doubts about his theory. This was because none of the 8 ancient gods grasped the sun pathway. Soon, Klein connected it to Amon's and Adam's father, the City of Silver creator who was deemed as the ancient sun god. After this creator awakened, and after a series of intense battles, he had taken back the authorities of the ancient gods. Hence, these ruins of the battle between gods were left behind. The incomplete mural he saw at the Elvish ruin suddenly surfaced in Klein's mind. Elf King Sanayathrim and the City of Silver's creator, who was also the ancient sun god, were at odds. As his thoughts wandered, Anderson had returned to his chuckling state. He looked at him and said, "How do I address you?" "Gehrman Sparrow," Klein simply gave his name. "Gehrman Sparrow?" Anderson was first taken aback before recovering. "I've heard of you. You're the adventurer who nearly successfully hunted Vice Admiral Ailment. You have the title of the craziest hunter. Last month, when the ship I was on board passed by the Rorstad Archipelago and Oravi Island, I had thoughts of getting to know you over drinks, but your whereabouts were unknown." "Last month? I was doing volunteer work at the hospital." Klein nodded and said, "You know me now. Also, try your best not to say anything." Anderson forced a smile. "I know, my bad luck tends to make the negative words I say become reality." "All right, stop looking at me. I won't speak again. Put down that charm of yours." Due to the appearance of the stone giant, the pirate's relaxation time was cut short. The future quickly set off once again, venturing deep into the sea. Find authorized novels in WebNovel faster updates, better experience please click for visiting. Along the way, Klein stayed standing on the deck and leaned against the side of the ship. He observed his surroundings while Anderson was loitering on the ship. He was good at socializing and interacting with the pirates. Impressive. He easily got to know the situation of the ship. Klein shot a glance at Anderson, who was drinking with a few pirates in the shadows, as he sighed inwardly. Of course, the strongest hunter probably doesn't know that the alcohol he's drinking has a sedative of unknown origins. Klein held back his laughter as he thought mischievously. With Anderson's help, the future circled around 2 hidden maelstrom and a floating palace ruin as it continued down the safe sea route. About 3 hours later, night fell again. Klein rapidly found his lucidity and reason in the dream as he opened his eyes and looked around. His vision was a swath of pitch blackness with nothing to be seen. "Don't tell me I'm blind." Such a thought instinctively appeared in Klein's mind. Then, he reached his right palm into his pocket and took out a matchstick. This was a component that every magician needed for his spells. With familiarity, he took out a matchstick and ignited it. Immediately, a weak flame appeared in front of Klein's eyes. The flame struggled as it bloomed, slightly illuminating his surroundings. He was in a prison cell, one with an unlatched gate made up of metal railings. Why would I be here? I'm neither beside Admiral of Stars or in the mural hall where Anderson was. I'm randomly placed in a particular area. As his thoughts raced, Klein flicked his wrist and extinguished the matchstick that nearly burnt his fingers. A resplendent layer of sunlight bloomed on his left hand as his eyes had two miniaturized suns. With the soul of the priest of light, he obtained night vision from the light of holiness. As he observed his surroundings, Klein saw that the cell he was in wasn't too cramped, but the floor was dirty and messy. There were many footprints, a mystery as to what previously happened. Most of them are human footprints. A few of them are rather exaggerated, likely belonging to giants. The single bed is broken in the corner while there's a key beside the door. Someone succeeded in a jailbreak. Klein came before the unlocked metal gate and carefully looked outside. The prison was filled with darkness. The darkness enveloped a stone-paved corridor, and across from him was a cold but solid wall. The path extended continuously on both sides as though there were more prison cells. Klein retracted his gaze, picked up the key on the ground, and locked the gates. He didn't attempt to head out and continued staying in the cell. He clearly remembered that Wuxia had advised him not to explore the dream world. Therefore, he planned on awaiting the arrival of noon. So what if it's a prison cell? It's not like I'm leaving. Klein huddled in the corner, sitting on the halved single bed, seemingly blending with the rich darkness around him. In this extreme silence, Klein suddenly cocked his head since he vaguely heard light footsteps. The sound of footsteps came from afar in an ethereal manner and at a slow frequency as it approached him. No way. I haven't gone anywhere. Has the far-reaching hands of trouble come on its own? Klein revealed a grimace that didn't match Gehrman Sparrow's persona. He nearly drew a gasp. The only thing stopping him from doing that was because it would cause quite a stir, making trouble discover his hiding spot. No longer a green nighthawk, he rapidly made up his mind. He held his breath, slowly stood up, and moved to the side of the metal gate, without a sound. He secretly and silently looked in the direction of the incoming footsteps. He believed that, since hiding and avoiding it wasn't necessarily useful, he had to determine the danger revolving around the situation so as to make the best choice. The two miniature suns in his eyes dimmed as Klein waited for nearly a minute as he heard the footsteps turn heavier and clearer. Following that, he heard the clanking sound of a metallic gate slamming into the wall. Following that, he saw a towering figure appear on the right of the corridor. The figure was nearly 2.5 meters tall and wore black, full-body armor. The cold feeling it exuded seemed corporeal like a gigantic knight. His aura was converged, and he was stayed like the deep sea. In the space where his eyes were, there were two deep red glows that flickered. In his hand was a long and broad black sword. Creak. He pushed open the metal gate to a cell and stepped in. He circled the cell, seemingly in search of something. Man. Is he trying to find a particular prisoner? I'll definitely be discovered if this continues. Klein hesitated for a moment and wondered if he should leave the cell and search for a way out before the figure came close, or to sneak an attack to finish the target in a clean swoop before continuing to huddle in a corner to await the end of the dream. After judging how much time he had left to think, Klein quickly took off the topaz pendant on his left wrist and began divining with a voice that perhaps only he could hear. That knight from before is very strong. After quickly repeating it 7 times, Klein opened his eyes to see the topaz pendant turning clockwise at a high frequency in large amplitudes. This meant that the target was an extremely dangerous existence. Without any hesitation or time to hesitate, Klein used the beyonder powers of a clown and controlled his muscles to pull open the metal gates without causing any additional stimulation. Then, he took the opportunity when the black armored entity entered another cell, to gently walk out into the corridor and rapidly headed left with his body crouched. In the immense darkness, as he listened for any commotion behind him, he maintained his stealthy and swift motions, quickly making a bend and arriving at a metal gate which opened outwards. It looked like an exit. Attempting to push and pull, Klein discovered that the metal gates weren't heavy, but it had been locked. After 2 seconds of thought, he took out the key he picked up inside his cell, inserted it, and twisted it without holding out much hope. A light click of a latch opening sounded as the metal gates unlocked. That works. Although it's a dream, you can't just have a randomly picked up key be an important item. I originally planned on folding some paper to insert into the keyhole and repeatedly slice at it, bit by bit. Klein slowly pushed open the door as he lampooned while thinking in puzzlement. To his disappointment, what stood behind the metal gates wasn't the exit but a hall filled with junk. Closing the gate behind him in passing, he locked it again and circled around the items randomly strewn around, in search of a possible door or path. A few seconds later, he noticed an inconspicuous black wooden door in a corner. Therefore, he carefully approached it and reached out for the handle. The scene inside naturally appeared in his mind. It was a storage room, and on the right was a full-body mirror. And to its right was a figure wearing a short linen robe. There's someone there. The escaped prisoner. Having been forced to leave his comfort zone, Klein decided to take hold of the initiative in a limited fashion. Therefore, he gently twisted the handle and pushed open the black wooden door. He wanted to gather information on the general situation, so as to determine where to engage in combat or flee at the critical moment in time. "Who is it?" the figure wearing a short linen robe hurriedly but softly asked. Its voice was filled with despair and pain. "An adventurer," Klein succinctly answered. He had already used his night vision to discern the figure's looks. It was a man with a weathered face. He had wrinkles on his forehead and the corners of his eyes and mouth, but his hair was raven black and lustrous. There wasn't a single strand of gray hair. His short linen robe was ancient and simple. His expression was distorted due to the pain. His rarely seen pure black eyes were filled with unconcealed surprise and puzzlement. "Adventurer? Why would you be here?" Klein maintained a certain distance from the man who was difficult to discern whether he was considered young or old. He stood by the entrance and looked at him. Before asking others, introducing yourself is a necessary form of politeness. As a faceless, just the short act of sizing him up from before had made him grasp the man's features. Apart from the discordant hair and the wrinkles, he had an old, gruesome scar on his cheek. The man was startled as he worriedly glanced at the hall. "It's best you close the door. We cannot be caught by that devil, otherwise." The muscles on his face clearly twitched as though he had recalled something nasty. "Devil?" Klein murmured and extended his hand back to close the black wooden door. The man heaved a sigh of relief and smiled wryly. "I apologize. I was indeed impolite. My name is Leo Master, an ascetic of a religious organization." "A religious organization? From the looks of it, you aren't a devotee of any of the 7 deities." Klein discovered a problem with his choice of words. If he was an ascetic of one of the 7 deities, he could have directly said it out loud. Even the high priest of the Church of Sun and the bishops of the Church of Storms wouldn't come to blows the moment they met in such a dangerous place. Leo Master said with a self-deprecating laugh, "That's right. I worship the original creator. He is an omnipotent and omniscient existence, the source of everything great. He is the beginning and the end. He is the God of all gods. This." Upon hearing how this person revered the original creator, Klein's first reaction was that it was the Twilight Hermit Order. However, there are also some smaller denominations in the northern and southern continents. There's quite a number of people who believe in the original creator. Klein deliberated as he asked, "What's the name of that religious organization? How did you end up here?" Leo Master hesitated for a moment before saying, "To the far east of the Sonia Sea is where my lord sleeps. His sacred mountain is hidden somewhere there. I led a pilgrimage here in an attempt to witness his miracles to redeem myself. Perhaps it's a necessary test. We were caught by that devil, and one by one, we died. Later, I seized the opportunity to escape the cell and hid here, awaiting the devil's departure." Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Do you know the name of that devil? What characteristics does he have?" Leo Master shook his head, saying in a somewhat puzzled manner, "I do not know his exact name, but many pilgrims seem to know him. They call him the Saint of Darkness." Saint of Darkness? A demigod? Is this Leo Master's dream, or is it the demigod's dream? From the outcome of my divination, it's likely the latter. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that dangerous. Klein was about to continue asking which organization Leo Master was from and determine the beyonder powers of the Saint of Darkness when he suddenly noticed the full-body mirror opposite the ascetic through the corner of his eye. In mysticism, mirrors were passages that connected hidden and unknown worlds. It easily brought about terrifying accidents, therefore, Klein, who was in a dangerous dream, carefully walked over and planned on using the powers of a priest of light to destroy the item. "No, don't." Leo Master seemed to sense Klein's intention as he cried out softly in horror. "Without it, I will immediately die." Find authorized novels in Webnovel Faster Updates, better experience please click for visiting. Klein looked at the mirror again in puzzlement. Although the environment was abnormally dark, the mirror clearly reflected two figures. One of them was Leo Master with his numerous wrinkles and raven black hair. The other was the thin-faced, black-haired and brown-eyed German sparrow who wore a cap. At this moment, the German sparrow in the mirror slowly moved his head even though Klein didn't make any movements. He revealed a deep, sinister smile towards him. The mirror's surface suddenly rippled as a hand reached out. With just the blinking of his eyes, the German sparrow, who looked identical to him, crawled out of the mirror. His face was tainted with an obvious sinisterness due to the darkness cloaking it. How terrifying! Unfortunately, I don't look like German sparrow, therefore, you failed to scare me. If Zhou Mingrui came out of the mirror, I might have been woken up out of fright. Klein calmly looked at his counterpart and raised his left hand which swirled with a layer of sunlight. The sinister German sparrow smiled as he raised his left hand as well, making a darkness that was made up of magnificence and sinisterness surface on his glove. This corresponded to the powers of a baron of corruption. My clone. Klein thought as he raised his right hand expressionlessly. From out of nowhere, he held a short milky white scepter in his palm, and at its tip were embedded blue gems. See God Scepter. Although his actions in a dream needed to abide by logic in order to achieve the desired effects, Klein suspected that the illusory world was unable to influence the mysterious space or the grey fog. Therefore, he attempted to simplify the ritualistic process and told himself that the Sea God Scepter was stored in a similar unique zone in the spirit world. He could retrieve it whenever he wanted. The outcome from his attempt delighted Klein. Indeed, the dream world was unable to differentiate between a unique zone in the spirit world and the space above the grey fog. With the premise of the Sea God Scepter belonging to him, this sealed artifact at the demigod level was retrieved. It really works. Otherwise, I'd have to engage in an intense battle. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He similarly believed that the mirror was unable to replicate matters related to the grey fog. The sinister German sparrow looked opposite him in a dazed state. He instinctively raised his hand, but his right palm was empty. Then, he saw countless bolts of silver lightning shoot out, enveloping him inside, causing him to expend one paper figurine substitute after another without being able to escape from the area. With a sizzling sound, a huge ball of lightning illuminated the cramped room which provided no room for dodging. Following that, the German sparrow from the mirror vanished. For some reason, Klein felt himself immediately turn serene, as though he had become a sage. He turned his head and looked at Leo Master again. "What's the name of the religious organization you joined?" Leo Master trembled as he answered, "Aurora Order, Aurora Order." Klein was stunned as he couldn't help but prick up his brows. At this moment, there was a loud clanking outside. The locked gates that opened outwards had seemed to have been kicked open. Thump. 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 The heavy footsteps that sounded like drumming walked towards the corner, seemingly discovering where Klein and Leo Master were hiding. Klein suspected that the lightning storm from before had been sensed by the Saint of Darkness. There's no way of hiding. Klein held the sea god's scepter and kicked the black wooden door of the storage room open towards the Saint of Darkness. As the door tumbled, he clearly saw his target's appearance. The knight, who was wearing black full-body armor, had already raised up his visor at some point in time, revealing his deep wrinkled face and some of his bright raven-black hair, as well as the old scar on his cheek. He looked identical to Leo Master. Even the minute features were identical. The only difference was the deep redness that emitted from his eyes. Chapter 655, Dream Analysis Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Klein was alarmed. He instinctively turned his body to the side without exposing his back to Leo Master, who was trembling in horror in the storage room. He couldn't be certain that the prisoner wearing a short linen robe wasn't problematic. At this moment, the deep redness in the black-armored knight who had the same face as Leo Master brightened drastically. He raised up the gloomy broadsword in his hands. Bam! With a step forward, he cleaved forward at a speed that Klein couldn't capture with his naked eyes. At the same time, Klein, who was standing to the side of him, subconsciously raised the sea god's scepter and made the blue gems at its tip light up simultaneously. Whoosh! A corporeal hurricane appeared out of thin air as it swirled around Klein, protecting him within the eye of the hurricane. Whoosh! The black streams of light carved its way over as layer after layer of the strong winds dissipated, scattering in every direction, causing the entire hall to tremble. Boom! Under the black broadsword, the hurricane produced an explosive boom and was reduced to a surging wave that flooded the entire region. It lifted up all the junk into the air. The intense collision clearly shook the dream as Klein felt his mind go adrift. He couldn't help but roll twice. Plop! He fell from his bed to the floor, the fall causing him to open his eyes. That Saint of Darkness is really powerful. Or should I say that I've never used the sea god scepter in the real world, so I'm unable to replicate its full might in the dream. Wait! It's still night. Klein suddenly noticed a problem. At that moment, the midday sunlight wasn't beaming in from the windows. His awakening was due to the intense struggle in the dream, not due to a natural occurrence. That also meant that he needed to sleep immediately, otherwise, he might very well disappear in the dark night, never to be found again. With that thought flashing in his mind, Klein pushed his right hand to the ground, flipping his body up as he flew towards his bed and laid himself down. Then, he imagined the stacked spherical lights and quickly entered his dream. During this process, Klein swept his gaze to the window and vaguely saw the dark night outside. It was quiet and serene without any sense of sinisterness. Meanwhile, he vaguely felt that there was a fog encompassing the surface of the sea relatively far away. Amidst the fog, there was a cathedral composed of rather ancient architecture. It was completely black in color. There wasn't a bell tower, and at the top of it were pitch-black ravens spiraling around it as though they were consecrating or lamenting over something. This cathedral has many buildings around it. There are ordinary two-story residences and simple wooden huts. There are bread shops with hanging signboards and grayish-white mills using water wheels for power. Pedestrians pass through the main streets and alleys with their figures flitting about, impossible to know of their actual situations. A mirage? The source of the danger at night? All the people who disappeared had lost their minds and went somewhere. Klein woke up from his dreams because he subconsciously considered the questions that he had accumulated. Following that, he forcefully made himself concentrate. He retrieved the sea god scepter from the spirit world's unique zone. He remembered that he was in an intense battle with the Saint of Darkness just before he left the dream. The slightly dim golden light shone into Klein's eyes as everything immediately turned bright. What he could see was no longer the tall knight dressed in black full-bodied armor, nor was it Leo Master, who was dressed in a short linen robe. Instead, he was facing a floor-to-ceiling window that faced the setting sun. The window was very clean and revealed an indescribable sense of purity under the sun's illumination. By the side of the window were tables with their original wooden colors and black high-back chairs. Further away were rows of bookshelves with all kinds of books placed on them. A library? A book repository? Every time I enter this dream world, I'll be placed randomly in a certain area. Klein carefully observed his surroundings and confirmed that it was temporarily safe without the so-called Saint of Darkness or strange evil creatures. He held the sea god scepter and first came to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the environment outside. The first thing that he saw was the opulent buildings that covered the opposite mountain peak. The huge palaces, magnificent steeples, and the towering city walls that all appeared frozen in the sunset. It was a visual spectacle. Even though it wasn't his first time seeing it, Klein still held his breath, quietly admiring this miraculous scenery for a few seconds. He then moved his gaze away towards the cliff. He saw the high walls of the black cloister and the withered trees beside the boulders. But as they were blocked, it was impossible to confirm whether Katlia remained in her original spot. Indeed, within a certain radius, it's not possible to leave this region. I'm deep inside the black cloister. Klein retracted his gaze in thought as he walked to the bookshelves. He temporarily didn't have the time to consider what happened between the Saint of Darkness and Leo Master in his previous dream. This was because he needed to determine his current situation. When he arrived by the bookshelves, Klein discovered that the books placed on them had their own names. They weren't blurry and indistinct like ordinary dreams. The Spirituality of Life, Book of Charms, The Flower Within the Heart, The True Cosmos and Inner Universe. These are all books on mysticism. Klein carefully reached out and took out the Book of Charms. He quickly flipped through it and realized that he knew most of the content, but there was a small portion which he had never come into contact with. It can be confirmed that this isn't from my dream. Ma'am hermits. The knowledge that pursues her and is injected into her has been conjured in this black cloister. Klein had no desire to explore beyond where he was. He held the Book of Charms and returned to the side of the floor-to-ceiling window. He found a spot to sit down and began reading in a serious manner with the sunset's glow. You can still study even in dreams. As he lampooned, he took out a pen and paper as he wrote and drew. While he was engrossed in this, the light suddenly bloomed as blinding whiteness blanketed his vision. Klein naturally opened his eyes and felt warmth from the sunlight that shone inwards. I just read a few pages and planned to speed read it before using dream divination to recall them. Klein sat up, frustrated. He felt like he had lost a good opportunity to study. This was because he couldn't determine if he would be randomly placed in the Black Cloister's library again. He straightened his hair, wore his cap, and went to the deck. As he observed his surroundings, he recalled the dream. That prison is likely inside the Black Cloister as well. Yes, it might be underground. In other words, the Saint of Darkness and Leo Master are in a ruin nearby. It's no wonder that Wuxia told me not to attempt exploring the dream. These places are really filled with danger. Why would the Saint of Darkness and Leo Master look identical? That dream was a little strange. Also, that full-body mirror was very magical and sinister. It actually managed to clone a German sparrow. Upon recalling this, Klein began to find examples from his past experiences to confirm his thought processes by comparison. This was called relying on experience. Soon, he thought of something. He had once borrowed the mental terror candle in Backlund and helped Father Yatravsky eliminate that past him. A character that was dissociated from his original self. Could it be that Leo Master is the Saint of Darkness from the Aurora Order? Due to certain reasons, he had split his personality, separating his good and evil sides. That sealed and dark prison is the reflection of his inner dream. Yes, that full-bodied mirror. Leo Master had said that if it were destroyed, he would vanish as well. When I looked into the mirror, the German sparrow inside it did form a corporeal body. It was evil. It's no wonder I felt like a sage after I eliminated the German sparrow in the mirror. It's because I got rid of my evil and sinister thoughts in my mind. Yes, that full-body mirror must be in the form of a mirror in the real world. These waters clearly have the beyonder remains of a visionary. It conjures many unreal and real monsters that can kill. And this belongs to the spectator pathway, therefore, being able to split good from evil and causing dissociated personalities does make logical sense. Heh, Saint of Darkness Leo Master is a high-ranking member of the Aurora Order. He must originally be very evil, but that ruin or item stirred up his inverse side, which is the good hidden deep in his heart. It caused a split personality, hence, he is trapped somewhere nearby. Klein felt that he had roughly understood the truth to the matter and felt a little regret. Unfortunately, I'm unable to enter the same spot a second time. Otherwise, with the Sea God Scepter and Leo Master's good side, there's a high chance of defeating his evil side, the Saint of Darkness. And the damage dealt in the dream world would continue on in the real world. In that case, a good saint who understands the Aurora Order would be born. It will make it easier to strike down on this cultist organization. Klein silently sighed and turned halfway around and watched Anderson Hood walk out of the cabin. Where did you go in the dream? I didn't actually find you, the strongest hunter asked as though they were best buds. Klein secretly frowned as he asked, why should I be seen by you? Anderson was taken aback. Shouldn't you return to the spot where you left the dream upon returning there again? There are other elements involved in my random appearance in other spots within a particular radius. Something to do with my uniqueness. Klein realized that the problem was more complex than he had imagined. He said with some deliberation, I went elsewhere after entering the dream. Strange. Anderson frowned as though he was very puzzled. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he thought before speaking again, there's another strange incident. What? Klein asked cooperatively. Anderson surveyed his surroundings. Back when I was pretending to make a canoe in the hall last time, I heard the sounds of a door opening and of footsteps that came out from deep inside. But when I looked up, I found nothing. I originally thought that it was someone from the ship, but later it didn't seem like the case. Chapter 656, Crazy Mutations Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Someone opened a door deep in the Hall of Murals and came out? A rampager or beyonder creature who was nearby. Furthermore, it possesses the ability to act in dreams. After hearing Anderson Hood's description, Klein began making logical speculations. As his thoughts whirled, he suddenly had a new idea. Could it be the owner of the mysterious eyes that observed me and the deck? It's possible. If that mysterious person has been lurking on the ship the entire time and followed us into these waters, then he'd have to sleep when night falls, so he will appear in the dream world. Ma'am Hermit is completely unaware of his existence, or has she tacitly agreed to his actions? Or he's the trump card that she wields, which is why she isn't afraid of the dangers in these waters when taking on my mission. No, that cannot be determined. At the very least, I can't determine that the person who opened the door deep inside the Hall of Murals is the mysterious person on the ship. Klein looked at Anderson with a deep, gloomy look before asking, why does it seem unlikely? Back when Anderson Hood mentioned it, he originally suspected that the person who opened the door was a member of the future, but he later felt that it was unlikely. Anderson chuckled. I visited every person on the ship in the dream, and I discovered that no one possesses the ability to act freely in that world except you. Unfortunately, I was pushing open a door outside back then, Klein said calmly. Anderson shrugged and said, I know, that's why I'm not suspecting you. These waters have dangers lurking everywhere. All sorts of unimaginable monsters are active here. Perhaps the person opening the door from before was the stone giant from earlier or a rotting dragon who dreamed of countless treasures. Upon saying this, he leaned against the side of the ship and looked at the sea which was bathing in golden sunlight as he smiled wistfully. I discovered that ever since I escaped the ship sinking crisis brought about by the storm, my bad luck has been decreasing bit by bit. It's obvious that it's not fixed and wouldn't last forever. Look, I successfully swam onto the island, and although I kept meeting with all kinds of bad luck, I managed to last until you arrived. Yes, I do attract monsters and did make that stone giant appear, but didn't we easily resolve it? Also, nothing happened despite me being on board for several hours. Doesn't that explain? Before Anderson could finish his statement, Klein coldly cut him off. Shut up. Doesn't this guy know to keep his words to a minimum when faced with a livid expression? I really want to beat him up. If it wasn't for the divination above the gray fog that said that you haven't mutated or have a big shot possessing you, then I would have already sunk you to the bottom of the sea. Yes. Sequence 8 of the Hunter Pathway is Provoker. He must have easily digested the potion back then. From the bottom of his heart, Klein felt that the level of Anderson's provocation was far higher than Dannett's. Without feeling frustrated, Anderson raised his arms and said with a rueful smile. Fine, fine. I'll shut up. Seeing how he wasn't providing him with any more clues about the individual who opened the door in the dream world, Klein remained silent for a few seconds, suddenly turned around, and walked into the cabin. He had discovered a huge oversight on something. Since Anderson, who's plagued with bad luck, was on the ship, that meant that the chances of them experiencing an incident would only increase exponentially. Therefore, he needed to make some preparations. After returning to his room, Klein walked to the bathroom as he picked up Azek's copper whistle and Woloseptin's paper crane. After setting up the ritual to summon himself, he brought Tinder, the sun brooch, and the nightmare beyonder characteristic from above the gray fog into the real world. He didn't immediately switch out his equipped inventory, but he did place them inside his suitcase and beside the biological poison bottle. This way, even if danger suddenly struck, he would have a chance to adjust his inventory, and then he could make a selection based on the danger he faced. After doing all of this, Klein felt significantly relaxed. He put away the other items and left the room for the deck, afraid that he would miss any signs of mermaids. Just as he walked out of the cabin, he saw Frank Lee crouched in a corner, looking shocked and dazed. What happened? Klein felt his heart skip a beat. He was afraid that something had gone wrong with the crazy crossbreeder's experiments, causing everyone on the future to be embroiled in a terrifying biological disaster. Frank shook his head in a daze. Didn't I mention about those little things before? They actually need to sleep for some time before they can grow and reproduce. In the end. What happened in the end? Klein's expression turned solemn. This made the strongest hunter Anderson, who was bragging about how many pirates he had hunted to the audience around him without realizing the change in their eyes, sense something as he curiously stopped his description and came over. The crouching Frank looked up and said, "They just finished a large-scale reproduction stage and have even mutated. This is a miracle. And where have they gone? Are they still in your laboratory?" Klein instinctively felt that this wasn't something good. Frank used 2 seconds to digest the problem as he rolled up his sleeves to show his hairy arm. He pounded the deck in front of him and revealed a smile. They have drilled inside and have seemingly reconstructed the future. Amidst the dull pounding, something that seemed like milk spewed out like a fountain from the deck, spraying Frank Lee in the face. He licked the liquid by his lips and said in pleasant surprise, "The future. The future has produced milk." At the same time, the pirates by the side of the ship pointed down at the cannons in horror. The cannons are spewing milk. This isn't scientific. Klein nearly couldn't control the twitching of his facial muscles. Ever since he boarded the Future, and ever since the ship came to the ravine and began the descent, he felt that many of the things that had happened were extremely unscientific. It even exceeded the confines of his mysticism knowledge. Anderson watched Agape, nearly forgetting to inquire. He stomped his feet habitually and successfully saw another milk fountain spew out. One thought after another flashed past Klein's mind as he acutely figured out a problem. He immediately looked at Frank Lee and asked in a deep voice, "After your little things have infected the Future, will it continue infecting people?" While asking, Klein's right palm reached into his pocket. According to the situation, he selected the floating charm and prepared to fly into the air in order to escape the infection. Frank Lee thought seriously for a moment. In theory, yes. Before he finished his sentence, a figure appeared and kicked him in the ass, sending him tumbling a few times, slamming into pools of milk. That person was none other than linen shirt Nina, who was draped in a blue jacket. She glared angrily at Frank Lee on the deck as she cursed while hyperventilating. "Aren't you going to finish off those darn little things of yours? Did you do this while thinking that my breasts aren't big enough?" "All right," Frank Lee patted his ass and said unwillingly. At this moment, Klein had already taken out his charm and softly chanted, "Storm." He believed that he had underestimated Frank Lee's ability to cause trouble and suspected that the disaster brought about by him would only worsen, therefore, he decided to first fly into the air. Blue flames enveloped the charm made of tin as squalls immediately stirred. They swirled around Klein's feet and body, lifting him off the deck and to a height of 4 to 5 meters. Anderson was first taken aback before he reached out his palm in an attempt to grab Klein, but he was a moment too late. All he could do was watch Gehrman Sparrow rise up as he remained standing on the spot. This ordinarily handsome hunter shook his head with a warped expression, somewhat amused while also wanting to dismember the first mate of the Future. At this moment, Frank had already taken a bottle of dark green powder. He grabbed a handful of it, and as he chanted in Jotun, he scattered it around his surroundings. The moment the powder made contact with the deck, it immediately produced green vines that grew wildly. Soon, it drew out the milk and the little things, entangling the entire deck and cabin within. In just about 10 seconds, the Future had been reduced into a forest of vines. "Phew, it's over." Frank smiled at Nina before his expression changed again. They've mutated. At this moment, a pirate walked over in a stagger, shouting with a tinge of horror, A watermelon is growing from my head." Klein looked towards the voice and saw a green vine drilling out of the pirate's head. One of them seemed to produce a soon-to-ripen watermelon. This is the so-called mutation. This is way too crazy, goddamn madness. Anderson blurted out a sigh. His eyes then darted around as he said in a deep voice, "There's something wrong with the surrounding waters." In midair, Klein had also determined the same thing. If there wasn't any external disruptions, then Frank Lee's experimental products and Beyonder powers wouldn't have caused a simultaneous mutation. Rip. One vine after another tore apart as the window to the captain's cabin opened. Cadlia appeared there and shouted in an amplified voice with witchcraft, "Frank, stop all experiments. There are remnant auras of Mother Earth here." Mother Earth? Klein looked in surprise at Ma'am Hermit, and he felt that his theories about these waters being the battlefield of the gods had been completely overturned. "Oh my, merciful mother." Frank crossed his arms and made a pose like he was hugging a baby. Following that, he sprawled on the floor as he devoutly kissed the vines. Cadlia silently watched this scene as resplendent stars instantly swirled around her. Following that, she made the entire Future light up. With a flick of her finger, she made a colorless flame land on the vine outside the window of the captain's cabin. The vines were immediately ignited as they silently turned to ashes. The colorless flames silently spread and wreaked havoc, without harming a single sailor. As for the future, the light it produced helped it withstand the fire. Before long, the forest of vines vanished completely, leaving behind the pirate who had a watermelon growing on his head. Of course, the vine that was connected to it had been burned to nothingness. Phew, this is no different from a devil's descent. The pirate took 2 steps forward and carried the watermelon which had grown out from his head. Don't open it. Just as Catlia's warning reverberated, the pirate had opened the watermelon with brute force, partially to vent his anger and partially to satisfy his curiosity. The watermelon split into 2, and inside it was a milky white brain filled with gullies. Flowing around it was a blood-like liquid. With a thud, the pirate died immediately, without any chance of saving him. The Beyonder characteristics on him rapidly condensed at an extraordinary speed. How sinister and crazy. Klein sighed silently and prepared to land back onto the deck. At that moment, he saw a gigantic palm suddenly reach out from the surface of the sea, smacking the side of the future. The 5 fingers of the palm were long, each almost half a meter long. The entire thing was a grayish-black color like an arid desert. Klein silently drew out a gasp as he couldn't help but look at Anderson Hood. This fellow had just mentioned that nothing had happened since he came on board. Chapter 657, Terrifying Vitality Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. The grayish-black hand grabbed the side of the ship and quickly hoisted it up, revealing the submerged parts, inch by inch. Through the blue water waves, Klein saw a huge grayish-black shadow. Following that, squirming flesh occupied his entire vision. The monster seemed to be an amalgamation of countless blackening or graying corpses. Attached to the 2 gigantic palms were withered-looking arms that resembled dry timber. The arms stemmed from a corpse that was suspected to be from a giant. This giant's single eye was shut tightly as a few heads were stuck to its neck. And further down these heads were incomplete scaly fish, lizard bodies, or warped human corpses. Layer after layer, they formed flesh that appeared like a floating island. From the different corpses and the connections of the crevices, a yellowish-green gas was emanated and spread to its surroundings as though it was enveloping the entire area. Cough. 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 Just the smell of it had made many sailors on deck cough violently. It was so bad that they couldn't even straighten their backs. Upon seeing this scene, Frank Lee didn't hesitate to take out the materials inside a hidden pouch on his belt. He showcased his corresponding Beyonder powers, but to his surprise, Catlia's voice rang in his ears. "Frank, stop. Help Nina command the sailors to get them to adjust the sails." "Why?" Frank Lee subconsciously asked in return. "In this area, the supernatural matters within the authority of Mother Earth will mutate, including your powers." As Catlia spoke, she extended both her palms forward and pressed down on a particular spot on her desk. The symbols and the magical labels on the future immediately became more pronounced as they lit up one after another, converting the entire ship into a resplendent sea of stars. They seemed to correspond to each and every point of starlight that swirled around Catlia's body. The spreading yellowish-green gas was kept out as Klein began floating towards the window of his room from the closest wall. The coughing pirates felt alleviated, and under the lead of Bosun Nina and First Mate Frank, as well as the instructions of Adolov, they quickly adjusted the sails and attempted to make the future escape from the nearby waters in order to escape the influence of the mutation effects. However, the grayish-black colossal monster had held back the front of the ship, and the body beneath the water had connected to unknown parts of the ship in order to hold the future, preventing it from advancing forward. At the same time, formless tall mountains seemed to appear around them, blocking out the sea winds that blew from afar, preventing the future from using its strength no matter how it adjusted its sails. Faced with such a situation, there's a need to use a backup steam engine system. Unfortunately, the future lacks it. Yes. It can still fly with the help of the starlight, but that seems to be extremely draining on Mam Hermit. Besides, it will be difficult to grasp the direction and distance it will bring us. To make such a flight in such waters, there's a high chance of entering a more dangerous zone without being blessed with good luck. There's still the extremely unlucky Anderson on board. Klein floated by the window in his room as he took in the situation. He wasn't nervous, as neither Admiral of Stars Katlia nor the strongest hunter Anderson had showcased their true strength. Of course, that includes me as well. Klein added inwardly. He planned on first returning to his room and wearing tinder. Without any food around, using such a mystical item was more suitable than creeping hunger. The latter was to be reserved for him when facing more dangerous and complicated situations before throwing it above the gray fog for it to cool down. As for the negative effect of losing items on him, Klein already had a plan. He decided to put in his wallet, Azek's copper whistle, the adventurer's harmonica, and other items into his suitcase when changing his inventory, leaving creeping hunger, murloc cufflink, and the charms from the sea god domain. He would keep a close watch on the latter two to prevent them from being lost. And from a probability standpoint, the most likely item to be lost by Tinder would be the charms since they were the greatest in number. Klein wasn't worried about this. He had created charms with different effects. They were highly disposable. Besides, the corresponding metal in the storm domain is tin. It's very cheap and worth nothing. The Beyonder effects are bestowed by the Sea God Scepter, so I don't have to spend any additional money. As Klein mumbled, he reached out to push open the window to his room. At this moment, the colossal grayish-black monster, which was a combination of flesh, climbed higher again. With its approach, the busy sailors had their hair grow wildly, to the point of exceeding their waists. This wasn't the most terrifying outcome. It was more harrowing that the blob of flaxen-colored hair seemed to have a life of its own. They would interweave and bind themselves to their owners. As the hair began to produce similar changes, the lustrous sea of stars on the surface of the future could no longer hold back this influence. To a number of pirates who had shaved themselves bald, their uniqueness didn't bring them luck either. Their nose hair would rapidly grow at a discernible pace, blocking their nasal passageways. By the window of the captain's cabin, Katlia had raised her arms at some point in time. In her hand was a scroll made of smooth fish skin. Num. As the incantation in ancient Hermes resounded while the scroll burned in silence, a light green luster shot out from within, striking the monster's gigantic palm that appeared by the side of the ship. The squirming flesh formed from countless corpses didn't pause at all. It slammed down on the lustrous sea of stars, sending sparks flying while the ship trembled. The dark purple color in the depths of Katlia's eyes deepened. She didn't take out a new scroll, and she instead directly pushed her right palm forward. Imprison. When the mysterious incantation came out of the pirate admiral's mouth, the resplendent starlight that swirled around her flew out, descending upon the terrifying monster. The starlight instantly converged, creating a gigantic, transparent amber. It enclosed all of the squirming flesh and bound it to where it was. At this moment, a pitch-black and lusterless short sword appeared in the strongest hunter Anderson's right hand. On the surface of it was layers of diabolical patterns, but they were only an illusion. Seizing the opportunity of having the terrifying monster trapped in the starlight cage, Anderson's body produced a layer of blinding white flames. The flames flew forward, leaped out of the ship, and landed on the grayish-black flesh which was formed from countless corpses. Following that, the blinding white light rapidly flowed across the monster's surface as if it was engaged in painting an extreme piece of artwork. With a boom, the flames surged into the sky as Anderson jumped back onto the deck with his pitch-black sword. The colossal monster remained frozen in place, as though it had lost all its vitality. Crack! 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 Deep wounds appeared on its surface, shattering into countless pieces of flesh in just a second. A Reaper's offensive strength is truly exaggerated. Klein, who had redone his inventory, returned to the side of the window to see this scene. Suddenly, he frowned indiscernibly. At this moment, something unexpected happened. The fractured pieces of flesh spread out their limbs, shooting towards the deck in a barrage of attacks. This colossal attacher seemed impossible to kill no matter how many pieces it was divided into. The number of pieces determined the number of monsters. Silently, a piece of grayish-black flesh facing the captain's cabin jumped up from the deck, heading straight for Admiral of Stars in a bid to wrap around her head. A figure surfaced from the darkness and shielded Catlia. It was none other than bloodless Heath Doyle. He opened his mouth as they cracked open, all the way from his nose to his chest. Soon, he formed a squirming vortex of flesh and blood. The vortex sucked at the grayish-black flesh and rapidly swirled inwardly, pulling it inside. Heath Doyle landed on the deck like a shadow. After wavering a little, he finally recovered. As for the grayish-black flesh that had splintered off from the monster, it had completely disappeared. The most terrifying part of the monster is its ridiculous vitality. If only this trait can be stolen. Having used another floating charm, Klein floated out the window. He reached out his black-gloved right hand and spread his fingers. The scene before him changed as a result. Blobs of different, gorgeous colors replaced the corresponding people and items. These colors kept changing as they rapidly twinkled, making it difficult for anyone to grasp the rules it followed. With the help of this vision, Klein discovered that the grayish-black flesh shared some of this luster. Although it was splintered, it was actually one. Calmly, he clenched his right fist, grabbed a blob of the light, and turned his wrist to the right. Suddenly, Klein saw the yellowish-green luster being drawn away, fusing into his right palm. This was the corresponding trait of the fog of poison. He had stolen the grayish-black monster's fog of poison. This was Tinder's effect. At the same time, Klein discovered that his damage transfer beyonder power was lost. He no longer had it. I can only steal from the same target once every 12 hours. With some level of realization, Klein looked at the surrounded future. The yellowish-green fog which was corroding the resplendent sea of stars rapidly thinned and no longer looked obvious. The grayish-black flesh that scattered everywhere also showed signs of desiccating and darkening. With that, the pirates found a chance to catch their breath. As for Catlia, she wore a golden brooch on the front of her classic robe. The brooch seemed to be made of gold, and it was shaped like a bird with a long feather tail. The surrounding atmosphere suddenly turned staid and serene. All the chaos and anxiety vanished in a baffling manner. Even Klein sensed the indescribable influence and felt like he had become an emotionless zombie. Seeing how the critical moment was at hand, a ship came cruising over. It was also a sailboat and was equally large. Its color was mainly dark with a ghostly green to it. Its ghastly pale mainsail drew a blooming pitch-black tulip. It was the flagship of Admiral Hell Ludwell, the Black Tulip. It was a ship that frequently plied these waters. Chapter 658, £55,000 Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios The Black Tulip. Admiral Hell Ludwell. This is jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. Aren't we a little too unlucky? Floating in midair, Klein was the first to discover the approaching ship. He couldn't help but turn his head to look down at Anderson, who was wielding his pitch-black sword and seriously observing the monster. Anderson quickly returned the gaze in puzzlement. As he remained wary against the grayish-black flesh which could shoot out at any moment, he asked, "The look you are giving me is very strange. Did something happen again?" Just as he said that, he reflexively shut his mouth and sensed something. With a leap, he dodged the monster's splintered body which was making his fingernails rapidly grow. He quickly arrived at the other side of the ship. As he straightened his back, Anderson suddenly hissed. "Admiral Hell. He wasn't a good person." As a pirate admiral who was infamous for killing indiscriminately, he didn't have any psychological burdens when it came to earning profit by fishing in troubled waters. Once he weighed the situation and realized that he could use the powerful monster to finish off Admiral of Stars and everyone on the future while also receiving tremendous spoils of war, he would definitely take action. My bad luck hasn't decreased at all. It has only switched to a lump sum withdrawal. Anderson's expression warped, it was a mystery on whether he was crying or laughing. At the same time, the corresponding information surfaced in Klein's mind. Just the bounty placed on Admiral Hell Ludwell's head by loan alone had reached £55,000. He was an extremely powerful member of the 7 pirate admirals, the one with the highest bounty among the 7 pirate admirals. His flagship, the Black Tulip, didn't have many pirates living on it. Most of the jobs were left to undead creatures or the spirit world creatures he controlled. He killed indiscriminately, but he didn't have a sick fetish for killing. All he did was seriously complete his job of sending living creatures to hell. He had all kinds of connections with the numinous episcopate. The rumors state that he possesses a ring left behind by the ancient death. While Klein and Anderson were looking at the Black Tulip, the golden brooch on Catlia's robe began to emit a pure bright light instead of blinding sunlight. In front of the captain's cabin was a blurry figure that was rapidly increasing in length. It was filled with the silence and serenity of a specter's aura, but it also emitted a warmth resembling sunlight. This was an extraordinarily incongruent existence. It was as though a wraith had been created out of sun-holy water. It was both holy and evil. The sun wraith widened its arms as it flew out at ludicrous speeds and hugged the grayish-black flesh. The sizzling sound of fat and oils burning sounded out. The sun wraith and the grayish-black flesh cancelled each other out as they were simultaneously obliterated, leaving no traces behind. The dark purple hue in the Admiral of Stars's eyes flowed as the brooch brightened. It quickly produced another sun wraith outside the window of the captain's cabin as it pounced towards the grayish-black flesh that had invaded the future. And at this moment, bloodless Heath Doyle protected Frank, Nina, and the other sailors. He used the devouring and digesting method in order to resist the monster's flesh which possessed immense vitality. The Black Tulip's speed was faster than Klein had anticipated. In seconds, it had entered a range which was cause for alarm for the future. The black sailboat with a gloomy green slowed down and stopped to the side. It didn't seem to be aware of what had happened. Suddenly, Klein saw a nearly transparent eye surface around the future's airspace. It had ghastly pale eye whites as it looked down from above without blinking. This is a spirit medium's version of a telescope. After a momentary pause, Klein drew his revolver with his right hand and aimed at the eye that belonged to a spirit world creature. At that moment, he was somewhat hesitant. As the crazy adventurer, Gairman Sparrow, to directly fire was the choice that matched his persona the best. But at this moment, Admiral Hell Ludwell had yet to show any signs of animosity. He might have qualms about the faction backing Catlia and hold back. If Klein were to rashly kill the telescope, it would undoubtedly push the situation into the direction of a more chaotic and dangerous development. During that brief dilemma, the nearly transparent illusory eye vanished. A distance away, the Black Tulip continued approaching as it became clearer and clearer. High above the Black Tulip, white skeletons, who didn't wear clothes or leather armor, busily controlled the sails while pale zombies patrolled the area with cutlasses in hand. The latter were observing their surroundings with green burning eyes. Shadows, wraiths, and all sorts of strange spirit world creatures were flying in circles, boring through the ship at times as the shipboard protruded transparent faces that weren't too obvious. Amidst Klein's spirit vision, the Black Tulip only had one living person. It was the man dressed like a captain, who was silently standing on the deck. He wore an exaggerated triangular hat with a white skull and feathers on it. He wore a lace-trimmed white shirt and a heavy and magnificent brown coat. The oxhide belt which held his white tights had a thin rapier hanging off it. The man wore a silver mask. His facial features and contours were hidden within. The holes that depicted his eyes, nose, and mouth had cold lines that left one shuddering. This matched the rumored image of Admiral Hell Ludwell. Where are his first mate, second mate, third mate, and boatswain? Klein was first surprised at the lack of living personnel on the Black Tulip before quickly coming to a realization. Just like how the third mate, the gunner commander, and many of the sailors of the future were sent to the other ships of the pirate crew, only the minimum number of personnel were used to enter these waters. Admiral Hell Ludwell didn't let his weak subordinates follow him. After all, he could control the undead and spirit world creatures to steer the ship. At this moment, the Black Tulip clearly turned around and aimed its starboard side over. As Admiral Hell Ludwell touched his silver mask, a salvo of shots rang out. Cannonballs flew over, some falling into the sea before they came close, producing splashes, others overshot and fell somewhere even further away. This was a calibration shot. Soon, the Black Tulip produced a second volley of bombarding cannon fire. Klein was just about to activate Creeping Hunger and use the Baron of Corruption's distortion power to change the target of the cannonballs, sending them further away when he saw Anderson Hood raise his right hand and push it forward. Orange-yellow fire ravens instantly condensed as they accurately flew out to intercept each and every cannonball. Boom! 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 Blinding flames were emitted in midair as debris scattered. It was as though dozens of fireworks were set on display. I have to say that a pyromaniac's powers are very useful at sea. It's a mystic version of a ballistic missile defense system. However, this is because Anderson is the strongest hunter and has already reached sequence 5. If it were Danitz, there's no way he could block them all. It would be pretty impressive if he could trigger half of them. Sigh, when I use flame controlling, I can only deal with one cannonball at a time. As Klein sighed, the Black Tulip ceased its bombardment and changed its speed again, closing the gap between it and the future. As it approached, the surface of the sea between the two gigantic sailboats which was dyed with golden sunlight rapidly turned black. It didn't look like ink, but the darkest night without any moon or stars. Translucent and illusory ferocious creatures crawled out of this dark sea. Pale corpses reached out their palms which had rotten flesh dangling from them as dark red or cold flames emerged, forming pairs of eyes. Suddenly, the area seemed to turn into the entrance to hell. All kinds of undead creatures floated on the surface of the sea in dense numbers as they charged forward like an unending tidal wave. Anderson looked back at the sun wraiths which were obliterating the grayish-black flesh, and he knew that Admiral of Stars was at a critical moment in dealing with the terrifying monster. All he could do was draw a gasp and look up at Gehrman Sparrow with a bitter smile. Just as he was about to press his hands onto the shipboard to create scarlet flames that spread outwards to prevent the invasion of the undead army, he was surprised to see Gehrman Sparrow turn around and fly back into his cabin. He fled. No way. Anderson's expression clearly froze. He grimaced as he hurriedly leaned forward with his extended palms to press onto the shipboard. Silently, a swath of scarlet flames soared into the sky and swept the area ahead of him. At this moment, a charm suddenly fell in front of him as he heard a word spoken in ancient Hermes. Storm. Ha! Anderson instinctively looked up and saw Gehrman Sparrow in his round neck shirt and brown jacket being swept up by a squall as he rapidly flew towards the Black Tulip. Is he committing suicide? I can't understand such madness. Anderson turned agape as he felt puzzled. Whoosh! With the charm's effects and the blessings of the wind, Klein flew to the airspace above the bow of the Black Tulip. Admiral Hell Ludwell immediately looked up at him. The eyes behind the silver mask burned silently with two pale white flames. The shadows, wraiths, and the spirit world creatures of the death domain who were spiraling above the Black Tulip immediately swarmed towards the enemy. They either opened their mouths, letting out silent screeches, or they extended their long tongues with shrunken faces as though they were extremely excited. Klein looked at them with a deadpan expression as he reached into his pocket with his left hand, releasing the wall of spirituality on a squarish box. Then, he took out Azek's copper whistle, which was tied to a few matchsticks, and threw them at the deck of the Black Tulip's stern. Suddenly, the transparent, cold, and indistinct shadows and wraiths paused. It was as though they were frozen worms. Following that, they didn't hesitate to turn their bodies to rapidly fly to the stern of the Black Tulip. The strange-looking spirit world creatures followed closely behind. In less than a second, the skeletons and zombies who were adjusting the cannons betrayed Admiral Hell. The bow was left completely empty except for Ludwell. Pa! Klein landed on the deck while pressing down on his cap, landing right before Ludwell. His body was bent slightly as he released the right hand on his cap, his gaze locked on the silver-masked Admiral Hell. Chapter 659, This Beyonder Power is Very Powerful. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. On the future, Anderson Hood pressed his hands on the shipboard and saw the undead army in the pitch-black sea recede like the tide. They rushed over one another and surged for the stern of the Black Tulip. He saw Gehrman Sparrow press his cap with his right hand while he descended from the sky before landing opposite Admiral Hell Ludwell. Such a scene was illuminated by dark red or gloomy green light. With the accentuation from the wraiths, shadows, and all sorts of strange spirit world creatures, there was an indescribable sense of beauty. Cool. As expected of the craziest adventurer. Anderson praised from the bottom of his heart before recalling something. Gehrman Sparrow had apparently thrown a charm in front of him before flying over. Furthermore, he had specially demonstrated the incantation to activate the charm. His intent is. Anderson had moved his gaze down and discovered a charm made of tin at his feet. On the Black Tulip, Klein, whose body was slightly bent while his eyes were locked onto his enemy, wasn't actually as cold and calm as his expression depicted. Anderson better fly over with the charm. There's a high chance that I can't deal with him alone. It might even be very dangerous. While his eyes reflected the silver mask and the two pale white flames, Klein silently prayed. As the mysterious eyes that observed the deck and himself existed, as well as the door opener in the dream world which Anderson Hood had mentioned, he cautiously gave up the idea of immediately praying to himself in order to use the sea god scepter above the grey fog to respond. He also warned himself not to expose such matters unless he was in dire straits. He believed that creeping hunger and tinder, together with the various beyonder powers of magician and the charms of the sea god domain, gave him the ability to fight Admiral Hell Ludwell. As for Azek's copper whistle, it could attract undead creatures or spirit world creatures that were inclined to death's domain. It could neutralize the most powerful means of a powerful spirit medium. For a sequence 5 beyonder of the death pathway, as long as it didn't exceed a certain number, one would often choose to overwhelm their enemy with numbers when facing a certain number of mid-sequence beyonders. However, Klein didn't believe that he alone could defeat Ludwell in such a situation or even kill him. Firstly, the battlefield would be held on the Black Tulip. Considering how Admiral of Stars could use the future, anyone with a brain knew that such a situation wasn't optimistic. Secondly, Ludwell was the most senior pirate admiral at the moment. He had the two powerful factions, the King of the Five Seas and the Numinous Episcopate, backing him. The mystical items and sealed artifacts he had might not be any weaker than Klein's or might even exceed his. In addition, many rumors indicated that he possessed a ring that was left behind by the ancient Death. Along with the fact that his sequence was lower than Admiral Hell, Klein was not only lacking in the adrenaline of a pending successful hunt or of performing great acting in the role of a crazy adventurer, but he was also tense and anxious. He didn't dare to be careless. All he wished was that the strongest hunter who was plagued with bad luck would quickly fly over. Only when two people of equivalent strength allied together could they have a small chance of defeating or resisting Ludwell, who had lost his undead army. It also gave Katlia and her pirates time and space to finish off the piece-together monster. Just as this thought flashed across his mind, Klein didn't hesitate to launch an attack. He made the fog of poison which he stole with tinder spread. No one could see the uneasiness and worry in his heart. Wearing an exaggerated triangular hat and silver mask, Ludwell raised his clenched left fist, spread his fingers, and aimed his palm at Klein. Instantly, the deck of the bow was enveloped by a harrowing yellowish-green fog. And in front of Ludwell, an illusory glow exploded. Following that, a point spiraled and collapsed inwardly, outlining a blurry bronze door whose two sides swung open. The bronze door was covered in all sorts of mysterious patterns. It had an indescribable heaviness and silence to it. With a creak, the door shook and cracked open a little. Behind the gap was endless darkness, as though it was the deepest and darkest night. Indescribable pairs of eyes were hidden in the darkness behind the door. They were densely packed and everywhere, but it was impossible to discern their actual bodies. Skinless arms covered in blood, along with greenish-black vines with baby faces reached out. Palms with mouths filled with teeth grabbed at everything beyond the door as they screamed, laughed, sobbed, yelled. This brought a terrifying suction force. Out of nowhere, cold hurricanes that sent chills down the bones stirred, pushing objects towards these strange creatures and the gap in the bronze door. The yellowish-green fog of poison was instantly cleared as Klein couldn't help but lean forward as he stumbled. The glove on his left palm immediately turned pitch black. It had the sinister feel of the night and the grandeur of the cosmos. Klein's brown eyes darkened as he spread out his left arm to the side in a gesture of politeness. The terrifying suction force that swept the bow's deck suddenly changed direction, grabbing the skeletons and rotting zombies that were rushing to the stern, and it threw them into the gap of the door. They were bound by the greenish-black, baby-faced vines and bloody arms and were pulled behind the bronze door where the countless eyes were. Distortion. Baron of Corruption's distortion. Klein had distorted the target of the mysterious door, and he used the skeletons and zombies on the black tulip to substitute himself. Despite that, he was still affected by the remnant forces of the tremendous suction force. He found it difficult to take a step, preventing him from fully making use of his nimble and agile traits. The cap he wore had already been blown up by the hurricane and was spinning in midair. It seemed to take flight as it pursued the undead creatures that had been sucked away. At this moment, Admiral Hell Ludwell, who wore his exaggerated triangular hat, raised his right hand again and extended his palm. The right side of his upper body rapidly turned illusory, as though it belonged to that of a specter or wraith. His arm kept extending and instantly covered quite a significant distance as his pale palm grabbed at his enemy. Whoosh! The noise from the hurricane suddenly vanished as soft sobbing sounds drilled into Klein's ears, causing his body to turn numb, as though his blood had frozen. As the pale palm approached, he seemed to be possessed by a wraith or evil spirit. He couldn't produce an effective response as he watched death approach. In despair, he felt his vitality deplete at an increasing rate. Without any resistance, Ludwell's pale and illusory right palm grabbed Klein and squashed him into a thin paper figurine. The paper figurine was covered with signs of dark green corrosion. Soon, it was shredded to dust under the hurricane that never stopped. To the side of the bronze door, Klein's figure surfaced again. His left glove had already been dyed with the color of pure sunlight. He immediately straightened his body and spread open his arms. Golden flames swirled around a pillar of holy light that descended from the sky, striking the bronze door which was covered in mysterious patterns. Sunlight suddenly burst out, and it was so blinding that it made it almost impossible for Klein to open his eyes. As for the terrifying door which Ludwell had created, it had begun shaking and turning slightly blurry. Even the extraordinary suction force from behind the door had weakened. More than half the greenish-black baby-faced vines and the bloody arms were vaporized. However, even more strange arms and distorted creatures attempted to squeeze out from the opening in the door. Just as Klein was about to continue using the Priest of Light's light of purification to purify the bronze door, Ludwell's pale palm swiped down wildly. Klein hurriedly dodged to the side as he kept rolling to avoid the remnant effects of the hurricane and the soul-sucking palm. 1 roll, 2 rolls, 3 rolls, and his body abruptly bounced up in a diagonal fashion. At some moment in time, creeping hunger had already appeared to be made of gold. Admiral Hell's silver mask was the first thing that was reflected in Klein's eyes. It included the pale flames in his eye sockets. Following that, 2 bolts of lightning brightened from the depths of his eyes. Interrogator's psychic piercing. At this moment, a black, square-shaped ring on Ludwell's left index finger produced a slight glow. Immediately a scene appeared in Klein's mind. It was a gigantic throne that was made up of the rotting heads of creatures like humans, elves, giants, dragons, demonic wolves, sea monsters, and vampires. On each side, there would be miniature transparent faces of wraiths, shadows, and evil spirits. They were filled with hatred, viciousness, and indignation. Suddenly, Klein felt as though his head had been struck by an axe. The fearsome pain filled his mind without any delay. His psychic piercing had not only failed to show its effects, but it had even ended up affecting him in an amplified manner. If not for him having experienced more extreme pain, Klein definitely would have fallen to the ground, wailing and struggling. But even so, he temporarily lost his ability to resist as he bent his back with a grimace. Seizing this opportunity, the gap where Ludwell's mouth was, a slow language that ordinary living creatures were unable to understand was emanated. The surroundings instantly turned dark, blurry, and illusory. This was the language of death that came from hell and the underworld. Just as Klein felt a little better, he discovered that his spirit body was floating up uncontrollably, separating from his body, inch by inch. And the terrifying suction force from the bronze door was an irresistible force to the spirit. No, this won't do. While his spirit body hadn't completely left his body, Klein raised his right arm and spread his hand, which was wearing tinder, with great difficulty. Different lustrous glows instantly interweaved as they surfaced before him and kept changing and rapidly flickered. Without any hesitation, Klein grabbed onto a pale white blob swirling with a gloomy green color. He twisted his wrist and extracted it. In this battle, the beyonder power he wished to steal the most was the one that created the bronze door, but he couldn't guarantee his success. All he could do was seek the blessings of the goddess. The lustrous glow flew over and landed in tinder. However, this wasn't the beyonder power that Klein wanted the most. However, it wasn't the worst either. The mouth behind Ludwell's silver mask moved, but it wasn't able to produce the sluggish, awkward language that was destined for the living to not understand. At the same time, Klein opened his mouth. One syllable after another of distorted, incomprehensible, jarring, and indecipherable words slowly spewed out of Klein's mouth. It made the hurricane produced by the bronze door's terrifying suction force to instantly calm down, cloaking the already dim surroundings with a deeper gloom. Only at this moment did he know that the beyonder power which Admiral Hell Ludwell had just used was known as the language of the dead. It could circumvent the protection of one's flesh and blood, so as to target the spirit body. It belonged to an advancement in a spirit medium's powers. It could go from direct communication with spirits to that of commandeering, to the point of enslavement. Living creatures were unable to understand the resounding language. Ludwell couldn't help but freeze on the spot. A transparent layer rapidly surfaced on his pirate captain attire. His spirit was being tugged at by an illusory power. At this moment, the black, square-shaped ring on Ludwell's left index finger produced a faint glow. The minute portion of his spirit body which had been forcefully drawn out had returned to his body as the two fused back into one. Ding! With his right hand, Ludwell drew the thin rapier hanging by his waist. It was iron-black in color, and its tip gathered the surrounding light, turning into a dark point. Admiral Hell suddenly took a step forward, and with vigorous wind currents, he suddenly closed the distance between him and Klein. Immediately, he thrust out the rapier in his hand at lightning speed. The bronze door, which was covered with mysterious patterns, remained standing erected in its original spot. It didn't vanish because of Ludwell's retracting of his left hand and subsequent actions. This was different from the similar-looking ability that Miss Sharon had previously cast using a mystical item. Oof! The black rapier pierced through Klein in an unavoidable manner. Klein's figure rapidly crumpled into a piece of paper. Its surface turned yellow and dry, as though it had been weathered for thousands of years. The hurricane brought about by the bronze door completely pulverized the paper figurine. In midair, Klein jumped out of the darkness as he held a huge handful of charms from the sea god domain. Storm! He quickly shouted in ancient Hermes as the tin flakes lit up individually as they sacrificed themselves to sea god. This also meant that if Klein wished so, he could recycle most of the materials and use it multiple times until the metals could no longer withstand the spirituality. Whoosh! Blue wind blades shot out as the surrounding waters sprayed out heavy waves that were as tall as the ship. As Klein didn't attempt or have the time to distinguish between the different kinds of charms, while these attacks inundated Ludwell, the extraordinary effects also augmented Admiral Hell. He was given augmented effects like underwater breathing, underwater mobility, flight, and pressure resistance, none of which were useful at that moment. Ludwell suddenly opened his mouth and produced a silent screech. He then struck the waves beside him as countless wind blades temporarily froze in midair. Immediately following that, Admiral Hell raised his left hand as the black, square-shaped ring on his index finger produced a sinister and eerie glow that instantly brightened. Whoosh! The bronze door, which exuded an indescribable feeling, instantly swelled as it doubled in height and width. Amidst a heavy creaking sound, the gap in the door opened up. The already terrifying suction force immediately rose to an unimaginable level. Blue wind blades and black sea waves were produced as Klein charged at the door from the air, heading straight for the strange vines and arms that extended outwards. Klein had planned on using the Priest of Light by clashing head-on with the bronze door with Light of Holiness to catch a breather, but he ended up seeing a glaring white fireball about half the height of a person fly over. The fireball's speed was augmented by the ridiculous suction forces generated by the door. It flew by Klein and smashed at the gap of the mysterious door. Boom! The white flames scattered as they rained down, but all it did was make the bronze door quake a little and dim a little. Klein took the opportunity and snapped his fingers. The few matchsticks he separated in his pockets immediately lit up as scarlet flames rapidly enveloped his body as he melted away. A flame burst out by the side of the bronze door as Klein leaped out of it. He instantly noticed that Anderson Hood was floating in midair in a rather awkward manner. He held a burning white spear in his palm. The strongest hunter had finally arrived, but he just appeared unaccustomed to flying. When Ludwell looked up and saw this scene, the pale white flames behind the silver mask clearly jumped twice. Clearly, he never expected that the future had two other powerhouses at the pirate admiral level apart from Admiral of Stars Catlia. Furthermore, they wielded pretty good mystical items and sealed artifacts. Find authorized novels in WebNovel faster updates, better experience please click for visiting. At this moment, Ludwell suddenly raised his hand and pressed down on his face, surprisingly taking off his silver mask. Heavy, pale white light suddenly spewed out from behind the mask, causing endless silence to instantly spread out from the black, square-shaped ring on Ludwell's left index finger. The silence surged into the bronze door and lifted it off the deck and into the air. The door covered in mysterious patterns fused with the endless silence as it rapidly burgeoned to more than 30 meters tall. With the sea as its base, it stood there, erect like an entrance to another world, one completely different from the present world. Creak. The bronze door opened as unspeakable darkness surged out and enveloped the black tulip's bow. Upon seeing this, Klein didn't focus on his attacks as he quickly took out the correct charm and rapidly used it on himself. A strong gust of wind swept over and lifted him above the black tulip. With the pull of the darkness, the gigantic sailboat steered into the bronze door, 10 meters a time, as it sailed into another world. Admiral Hell Ludwell stood at the bow as he looked up into the sky. His face was blanketed by the pale white luster, preventing anyone from discerning his looks. His gaze first swept past Klein before landing on Anderson Hood. He seemed to make a mental note of these two hunters, but he didn't make any further attempts to attack. He seemed to have been restrained by the surrounding darkness. Anderson was taken aback as he didn't hesitate to throw out the burning white spear in his hand. The spear shot straight at Ludwell, but once it entered the region enclosed by darkness and silence, it silently vanished. Ludwell is planning to escape. How decisive. Klein was first stunned before he recalled that Azek's copper whistle was still on the black tulip. With the gigantic sailboat halfway inside the bronze door and about to enter another world with no way to stop them, Klein threw a matchstick and snapped his fingers. He appeared 50 meters above the stern where the undead creatures were fighting for Azek's copper whistle. This item, which kept changing hands, finally burst into a scarlet flame due to the matchsticks tied to it. Amidst the flames, Klein's figure surfaced there and grabbed Azek's copper whistle. This was the preparations that he had made for retrieving the copper whistle. Furthermore, to prevent any mishaps from happening, such as the matchsticks being pulled away by the undead creatures, he had also coated the copper whistle with an easily flammable essential oil of the sun. Pa! Surrounded by countless undead, Klein didn't have the luxury of time to retract his hand that grabbed the copper whistle. He immediately snapped his fingers again. At this moment, transparent, rotting, pale, or illusory hands grabbed him. The matchstick Klein had previously thrown into the air ignited in midair as it produced a flame. His figure quickly materialized amidst the flames. His face was livid and his lips were white. Having been grabbed by countless shadows, wraiths, and undead creatures, Klein felt that the depths of his spirit body was ice-cold. He couldn't control his body as he plummeted into the sea dyed in gold. With the black tulip almost completely crossing the bronze door, the sea, which appeared like an entrance to hell, had been restored to normal. Klein sank a few meters and swallowed a few mouthfuls of bitter and astringent seawater before he ultimately recovered. Thankfully I was sufficiently prepared. As this thought flashed past his mind, he suddenly felt something amiss. By wearing the Murloc cufflink, he had the passive ability to breathe underwater for 10 minutes. He shouldn't have drank mouthfuls of water. Klein suddenly turned his head and looked at his wrist, only to realize that the blue cufflink had detached itself at some point in time. It's lost. Tinder lost it. I was on the black tulip the entire time. Klein splashed a few times and floated to the surface, just in time to see the gigantic sailboat's tail meld into the darkness as the bronze door slowly closed. He instinctively swam forward a few seconds before ultimately stopping. He selected one of his remaining charms and gave himself the Beyonder effect of underwater breathing. In midair, Anderson had clicked his tongue when he saw this. This fellow is really crazy, he's actually trying to engage in pursuit. At this moment, the starlight above the future fell and condensed into a long bridge that extended over. Cadlia had finally finished off the grayish-black monster with immense vitality. What a pity. If only Admiral Hell had hesitated a little and didn't flee in such a timely fashion. Anderson had sighed silently and firmly landed on the star bridge. As he watched Gehrman Sparrow fly over, he was just about to greet and praise him when he saw the cold and gloomy expression. Anderson instinctively made way and chuckled dryly, allowing Gehrman Sparrow to walk past him. After returning to the future via the star bridge, Klein held back his effusing emotions and watched Frank Lee walk over and give him a thumbs up. You're the craziest fellow I've ever met. You actually dared to board the Black Tulip alone and single-handedly challenge Admiral Hell. You even returned alive. Sorry, in terms of craziness, I'm far inferior to you. Klein thought in response. At this moment, pirates with long or disheveled hair expressed their astonishment and amazement. In such an atmosphere, Klein closed his eyes and felt his faceless potion completely digest.